from hell's heart, I stab at thee. For hate's sake, I spit my last breath at thee.
Sir, the mains are back online.
Scotty.
Go, Zulu!
Well, folks, here it is. The reason I went to Los Angeles in the first place. I went to the Fred Kavli Theater in the Civic Arts Plaza, located in Thousand Oaks, California, to watch Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan on the silver screen. Following the movie, none other than William Shatner himself graced the stage and talked for an hour about all sorts of stuff. I had hoped to film it all, but alas, I was prevented from doing that. My plan was to go to nearby Umami Burger after the show, where I would eat a truffle burger and discuss the awesome spectacle I just witnessed. But the restaurant closed at 10 p.m., and by the time I got through the meet and greet portion of the event, I simply ran out of time. William Shatner is awesome, but what is equally just as impressive is watching Star Trek II on the big screen. This film was meant to be seen in theaters. A lot is lost when the movie is transferred to the small television screen. For starters, the acoustics of the theater truly captures the space adventure in some unique and interesting ways. The characters' voices are more crisp and louder, and there is just so much more gravitas. Whenever the starships are on screen, the sounds of the engines make the whole theater shake. It was a feast for the eyes, too. The Starfleet uniforms are a deeper, more beautiful shade of burgundy. I also enjoyed Ricardo Montalban's facial expressions. He has more menace on the big screen. The audience cheered loudly when the credits rolled. They damn near blew the house down when Leonard Nimoy's name appeared on screen. It really felt like I was watching this wonderful movie again for the first time, which is quite a feat considering the movie is 36 years old and I've seen it countless times. I jumped a couple of times simply because the new atmosphere I was in. I really feel that the actors turned in their best performances in this film. It is sad that Ricardo Montalban, Leonard Nimoy, Harve Bennett, and the film composer himself, James Horner, are no longer with us. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is widely regarded as the most successful Star Trek movie of the original 6 films featuring the original cast. Initially, there wasn't going to be a Star Trek II because the first movie was very expensive to make and it underperformed at the box office, and it was also critically panned. Paramount Pictures was owned at the time by a man named Charlie Bloodhorn. It was his wife, who was about 20 years younger than he was, who convinced him to finance Star Trek II. Apparently, she was a huge fan of Star Trek, and she was very persuasive. He decided to hire a production team to test the viability of a new Star Trek movie. Legendary Hollywood producer Harve Bennett was hired on and watched every episode of the original series, and it was his decision to make Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan a sequel to the Star Trek episode Space Seed. The actors needed little encouragement to return because after Star Trek, They were all typecast, and therefore they struggled to find work in Hollywood. Ricardo Montalban was always fascinated by the character of Khan, but he found after being divorced from the role for 15 years, he had trouble getting into character. William Shatner was forced to go on a starvation diet so he could continue to portray Kirk as a masculine and physically strong hero. There is so much trivia about this movie that I could probably talk for hours discussing every factoid that I know. After the movie ended, William Shatner came out and everyone rose to their feet and gave him a standing ovation, which seemed to embarrass him. He said the movie was over 35 years old and he asked everyone to take their seats. He always likes to use the phrase "get a life" a lot. He always says that. He said that at least 2 or 3 times. He then discussed a wide variety of topics, including his Ubuntu philosophy, which he learned about by studying African culture. It is the belief of a universal bond of sharing that connects all of humanity. Ubuntu. For this reason, William Shatner has dedicated his life to helping others. To that end, he discussed his involvement in charity work. Specifically, he is part of the Hollywood Charity Horse Show that has been hosted in Burbank, California since 1990. The proceeds of the charity, which includes an auction and equestrian competition events, always goes to needy children, many of whom have physical disabilities. It is just one of the reasons why I admire William Shatner and why he is one of my favorite actors. It was a stroke of genius to show a Star Trek film prior to William Shatner's entrance onto stage. It gave the audience a chance to get all worked up about seeing him, and I think everyone was bowled over with intense feelings of nostalgia. I felt a shudder of electricity run through me when Mr. Shatner took the stage. He looks just like he does on television. He also looks amazing. He's got a big belly on him like I do, but he doesn't look or act like he's 87. Did he sell his soul to the devil or what? Now, I didn't know this, but apparently he has dabbled in auto racing. He told a story that began with him saying, "I know how to drive fast," and then he proceeded to discuss an incident where he almost burned to death in a crash on the racetrack. Again, talking facetiously about how he knows how to drive fast, he mentions a time where he got pulled over for speeding along one of Southern California's freeways, the 101 perhaps, and he was wearing a Starfleet uniform. He managed to get out of the ticket by using his juice as a celebrity. He told the cop he was just in a hurry to get to his spaceship. The cop laughed and simply gave him a warning. Mr. Shatner was asked questions that people from the audience submitted before the show. One question might have been planted, or else Bill Shatner is witty on the fly, ready with quick comebacks for off-the-wall questions. Someone wanted to know if he wore boxers or briefs, and he quipped, "Depends," which is a double entendre because it's the brand name of adult diapers. I'm sure everybody knew that. I mean, the audience was in stitches at that. Another question asked if Shatner could have played another role besides Kirk, who would it have been? He wryly answered, "Sulu, because then I wouldn't have to deal with George Takei." Those two have been feuding with each other for years, and neither one of them no longer hides their contempt for one another anymore. On the other hand, I've always wondered if the animosity between them is staged for our benefit, similar to the grudge Andy Kaufman had with pro wrestler Jerry Lawler. Years later, Lawler admitted it was all a sham orchestrated by the quirky Kaufman. Mr. Shatner also described the time period in which he was homeless, recently divorced, and completely broke, and living in a small camper when he watched the moon landing on television in 1969. He felt that he played a teensy role, he put that in quotes, he said that, in the popularity of the space race. Truth be told, Star Trek is directly responsible for fueling public interest in space exploration. Mr. Shatner brought up that he met with Stephen Hawking in the early days of his career on Star Trek. Hawking, of course, was ravaged by ALS, and his only way of communicating was to use his cheek to move a mouse cursor over each letter of the alphabet until he could type out a sentence. It was a laborious process that took hours to accomplish, depending on what Hawking needed to say. Apparently, he asked Shatner what it was like to be Captain Kirk, and he painstakingly typed his question into his text-to-speech software, one character at a time. much to Mr. Shatner's chagrin. Mr. Shatner then said something that I truly never heard before. He talked about how both him and Leonard Nimoy had provisos in their contracts that each of them must get what the other gets in terms of money, incentives, what have you, as they continue to appear in the Star Trek films. So Paramount offered Mr. Nimoy the chance to direct Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and apparently Mr. Shatner was then going to direct Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. He was unavailable to direct the fourth installment because of his commitment to the T.J. Hooker series he was heavily involved in at the time. I think Mr. Shatner would have fared better had he directed IV. By the time Star Trek V, The Final Frontier came along, Paramount wasn't as fast and loose with their money as they had been. There was a writer's strike and a recession going on at the time. Also, Final Frontier had stiff competition from Batman and Indiana Jones. 1989 was a good year for movie sequels, and Star Trek V simply got lost in the shuffle. I wish I could remember everything that Mr. Shatner talked about, but perhaps it will all come back to me. I do remember that Shatner was asked if he would ever appear in another Star Trek movie, but he was skeptical, citing his age as a factor. He did say that the technology is available to digitally de-age him on screen and make him actually look like he did over 50 years ago. He's certainly more physically active than most men half his age. Despite being 87 years old, he possesses the mental faculties of a man in his prime. I'm just completely blown away by that. He is perhaps the most versatile entertainer who ever existed. Mr. Shatner is a certifiable genius. He is highly educated, quite articulate, and he seems to have a firmer grasp of common sense than, well, just about everyone on the planet. I'd like to briefly discuss Mr. Shatner's background a little. I knew that Mr. Shatner was an actor, of course. He was born in Canada, and even though he studied finance in school and was on track to be a brilliant industrialist, acting was his true passion. He joined the Canadian National Repertory Theatre in Ottawa, where he trained as a classical Shakespearean actor. In 1951, at the age of 20, Mr. Shatner was cast in his first film role, a Canadian film called Butler's Night Off. His first American feature film was The Brothers Karamazov, released in 1958. He appeared in episodes of The Twilight Zone, one of which has been parodied over the years. Terror at 20,000 Feet, in which he portrays nervous airline passenger who recently had a mental breakdown on an airplane, and after spending time in a mental hospital, is flying again with his girlfriend in order to retain his confidence. Naturally, there's some kind of creature on the wing of the plane, and he's causing damage to the engine, and the only witness is Mr. Shatner's character. It's a really good episode, and it's easy to see why Mr. Shatner has been so successful throughout the years. Mr. Shatner gained a reputation for being a working actor. He always showed up on time, he knew his lines, but he took on virtually any acting role that came his way. A move that some say hurt his career prior to landing the role of James T. Kirk on Star Trek in 1966. Mr. Shatner took a variety of television roles, appearing on Alfred Hitchcock Presents and The Outer Limits. Mr. Shatner worked on I've never seen this show. It looks like Man from U.N.C.L.E., but it's like each letter has a dot next to it, like it's an acronym. So is it Man from U.N.C.L.E. or Man from U.N.C.L.E.? We'll have to figure that one out. Anyway, Mr. Shatner worked on Man from U.N.C.L.E. with Leonard Nimoy, and he also appeared on Gunsmoke, just prior to being cast as Captain Kirk on Star Trek. Part of William Shatner's appeal, besides his modest resume at the time, was that he resembled John F. Kennedy, and that he was what Gene Roddenberry was looking for during the search for the right captain of the USS Enterprise. At least 2 pilots for Star Trek were filmed without Shatner as Kirk, and those pilots received a lukewarm reception from NBC. Star Trek was put on the right track as soon as Mr. Shatner was on board. The series was popular at first, but the ratings soon declined, and after 3 seasons, the show was canceled. I could discuss his acting credits for hours. I think just about everyone on the planet knows that Mr. Shatner's flagging career was revitalized by Star Trek, the motion picture. However, as I said earlier, the film's box office receipts, while modest, the film did not perform on par with rival Star Wars, which was insanely popular at the time. By that reckoning, Star Trek II's phenomenal success catapulted Mr. Shatner into stardom once and for all and cemented his role in entertainment history. Mr. Shatner has gone on to do commercials, voiceover work, he's written novels, he's established himself as a singer, and he's even designed automobiles. He has a pilot's license and he has nurtured a lifelong love of horses and is an accomplished equestrian. And of course, he raises cars. Is there anything this man can't do? William Shatner is an inspiration to us all. Once completely bankrupt, he now has a net worth of more than $100 million. He's proof that if you put your mind to it, anything is possible. Alright, so we're supposed to be talking about his appearance in Thousand Oaks, California. So after Mr. Shatner finished his performance and left the stage, all the people who sprung for VIP tickets, about 200 people, were slowly shepherded backstage to pose with William Shatner for a free photograph. I got to stand elbow to elbow with him, and he even talked to me. He said hello, I said hi, how are you, Mr. Shatner? And he said it's a pleasure. And then I walked away so the next person standing in line could meet him. I was given a link to download the picture online, and so I was able to copy it that way. I thought when I visited the Space Needle in Seattle that was the best day of my life, but seeing William Shatner live in person and taking a photograph with him definitely has that beat. I wanted to tell Mr. Shatner where I was from, because Medford is significant to the Star Trek universe. In 1967, during the peak of Star Trek's success on television, Leonard Nimoy visited Medford and was actually the Grand Marshal of the Pear Blossom Parade, where he appeared in full costume as Spock. In another coincidence, the producer of Star Trek II, Harv Bennett, moved to Ashland after he retired from show business, and he later died in the same hospital I was born in. Then it was called the Rogue Valley Medical Center. Now it's some other fancy name. Everything has a fancy name. The airport's got a fancy name here, the hospital does. They should just keep it simple. Anyway, I guess it's wishful thinking that Mr. Shatner would have been impressed by any of that. Still, it would have been cool if Mr. Shatner would have invited me for a drink in his limo or something. By the way, security saw me filming and told me to stop, so what you see is all the footage of the event that I could get. Everyone was filming him. Everyone was. I wasn't the only one with a camera. They all had their cameras out, and they singled me out. I don't know why. It's just my luck. My whole experience in Los Angeles has been the best ever. William Shatner is awesome. I just have to say this, but nobody goes on and on like this for George Takei. No, I'm just kidding. You rock too, Sulu. Well, that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Space. The final frontier. These are the continuing voyages of the starship Enterprise. Her ongoing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life forms and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone.